Thanks everyone for joining today. So to get started, I'd like to begin with a statement from the late Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs states that design isn't just what it looks like and feels like, but design is also how it works. And the importance of this statement is that it actually starts to challenge design on being purely aesthetic. Because if we look at design from the basis of what something looks like, we're actually only considering the visual. We're only actually thinking about one of the senses, and that's the sense of sight, to see something. And as we know as individuals, the problem with this is that not everyone has that sense available to them. So actually, if we consider the visual alone, we're not actually being truly empathetic to our users or to people, because actually, as we know, not everyone then can engage with the content which is in front of them. But if we change our way of thinking, actually, we start to think about how things work, suddenly we start to consider all the senses that potentially we have available to us, and that's see, touch, hear, and speak, within the digital space. And when we're considering all the senses, we're actually considering people. And with that, we're actually enabling our customers to be able to connect with them on a more emotional level, because actually we're considering their needs right from the offset. And actually, when we consider all of these senses, we're actually thinking about inclusive design. We're actually aligning from both form and function. And within the digital space, form is the user interface and function being the UX. And over the years, there's always been this these principles always seem to fight against each other. You'll have one side saying everything's got to look good and don't worry about how it works. Then you have other people say it's all about how it works. It doesn't really matter about the form and what it looks like. But actually, it's not a boxing match here. These two can be in the same ring, but they don't need to fight against each other. And when these two work with complete harmony and balance, that's when we start to be a lot more inclusive in the way we design things, when we consider both practices. So on that basis, we've then got to consider, what does that mean for website accessibility? So what is it? Now, it's about being inclusive. It's fair to help people. At the end of the day, people have particular needs. So it's allowing people, regardless of their background or situation, to be able to get an equal experience, and not just an equal, but the best possible experience to them. And it doesn't look to alienate people. Accessibility, as we said before, it looks to be inclusive and to give that opportunity for people. As we know with accessibility, it's fair to help people, particularly those people with disabilities who it might affect the most. In the UK alone, 1 in 5 people do suffer with long-term illness, impairment, or disability. And that's quite a large number. And when we consider across the UK, we have 14.1 million people who are disabled, let alone worldwide. When we're thinking about people with disability, we've got to be able to think of the applications and the web interfaces and think how we can offer support for them. And some of the things we need to consider are auditory. So we need to think about users that might have, say, hearing loss. We have the cognitive, where we got to consider mental health disorders or learning difficulties, such as autism. With the physical, we're starting to consider people with, say, lack of coordination or muscular control. They could be in a wheelchair, have cerebral palsy, or could have had an amputation, for instance. With speech, sometimes users might feel a little bit more uncomfortable using voice recognition services if, say, they suffer from, say, stuttering, and they might choose to opt for more text-based solutions. So again, it's just vital that we can offer alternatives where we can. And then we got to also consider, we said before, the visual. We know that we have users that are blind or visually impaired. So again, they might not be able to see a mouse pointer, for instance. It could be that they have to tab through content or increase the size of text. But again, we just need to make sure that our interfaces accommodate all different types of disability. There's 4 key pillars that fall within accessibility, which we need to consider within a digital space. So we have the perceivable, and with perceivable, as we said before, it's not just about what we see. It's got to be based on all our other senses. So we've got to think about touch based. We've got to think about hearing and speaking too. When we look at how users then operate the interface, what devices they can use to actually access the content, how easy is it going to be to actually use the content once on the page or on the site, and just making sure that the interface is easy to understand. We really want to avoid confusion here. The idea is that these interfaces should be easy to learn. Simplicity is key, and otherwise it's only going to cause frustration if the user gets there and actually can't understand how to use or interact with the content. And then finally, we've got to consider how robust the application is. So again, is it adaptive? Can it work with assistive technologies, for instance, such as screen readers, which help people that can't see, obviously read the content aloud to them. So again, these are some of the principles we have to consider within accessibility. And we got assistive tech and devices, which we know are available to our users. Now, again, there's lots of assistive tech and devices out there. They're not all listed here, but we've just got a few to run through. Again, these devices and technology are there to essentially help users perform tasks more easily, and regardless of their situation. Now, there's also accessibility tools which are built directly into our computers and our operating systems, which again are really helpful for users on a day-to-day. But we've got to consider that, you know, we have things like keyboard and mouse, but say if someone's got reduced dexterity, they might not actually be able to use a mouse, they might opt for keyboards. We can also pair devices, so screen readers can be paired with braille displays, for instance. And again, so users might mix and match these technologies. So again, we've got to make sure that with our applications and our websites that they can be robust enough, as we said before, and adapt to accommodate these devices. As we know that with permanent disability, people are going to struggle the most here. And the reason for this is because actually the web just isn't inclusive enough at the moment. So it actually makes people who suffer with a permanent disability, gives them a harder time trying to just simply access content. But also with accessibility, it's not just within the permanent, we also need to consider temporary and situational. Now, with the temporary, it could be that someone could hear, but actually they've got an ear infection. So actually the way they now access content might be different, because they might opt for something where they don't have to focus on having to hear. Or it could be that you've, say, broken an arm, so you opt to use a mobile device because it's actually easily or more accessible in one hand. With the situational, it's actually thinking about our environment. If we're in a loud environment, actually, again, we might not use voice-based services, but actually we might opt for texting. Or if we're, say, in a library where it's quiet, again, we might need to think about if we've left our headphones at home, but actually might need captions on videos so that we don't create noise or disturb other people around us. So again, it's thinking across the board that accessibility actually at one point in time is going to affect each and every one of us. So moving on, is accessibility a legal requirement, or is it considered best practice? Government regulations state that all public sector bodies have to meet the requirement, and the standard is WCAG, and that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, they're readily available for anyone to see. You can go on w3.org to get these guidelines, and it's something that we follow in the Escape and we try to adhere to. Regulations do state that even though public sector bodies are included, there are exceptions to the rule, and not everyone does have to comply. The problem with this is, where does responsibility lie? Because if we've just mentioned above about being inclusive and about everyone getting the same experience of the web, then actually, shouldn't we all kind of be a little bit more accountable for making the web a better place to actually help everyone? So from our side, you know, we kind of consider, well, actually, it should be best practice. You know, if we look at it within the greater UX, actually, accessibility is at the forefront of what we do. You know, it is the heartbeat. If we look at every other principle around it, it's actually the one that every other principle is governed by. Because, you know, if we start looking at, say, audience definition, sitemap wireframing, content structure, if we're not considering anything from this from an accessibility perspective, then it actually all stands for nothing, because we're not doing our jobs properly and we're not reaching the maximum amount of customers and increasing our audience reach. So for us, it should be really considered best practice and should be the start of kind of any digital scoping project. Moving on, we'd just like to kind of cover some top tips really for improving your website's compliancy rating. There's lots of things you can do, but we've got a couple we'd like to go through today. So color contrast is really important. And actually, digital aside here is something that when we look at existing brand guidelines, or when we're defining brands at an early stage, over the years, they're very print focused. You would have 30 pages around kind of brand guidelines and, you know, specifying colors, clear space, but you'd have like 1 or 2 pages left aside for digital, and it always seemed like an afterthought. But the problem is we need to start changing our way of thinking in the industry. And actually, when we start specifying brand guidelines, we're looking at colors from the offset. And actually, we look at colors and making sure they are accessible when we apply those colors to web. And the reason for this is that color contrast is key for people with visual impairments or low contrast sensitivity to be able to actually read and see content on screen. Now, the example we've shown right here is our color palette for Feast. So we've got our Feast yellow and it's against our dark raisin background. And now you can do these checks yourself. So there's lots of color contrast checkers online. But if you put in your foreground color and your background color, it will give you your contrast rating. And as you can see here, it's done across normal text, large text, and graphical objects. As you can see, it passes on both AA and AAA compliancy. So what that means is that we know that if we use these colors as text, whether small text or large text, or on graphical objects such as icons or our user interface, but actually people with visual impairments are going to be able to clearly define and see that label or see that text. So it's essential that we get that right from the offset. Also, clear and consistent layout. And this goes without saying, but this here kind of marries up again what we were talking earlier about form and function. When we consider our layouts, actually, we really need a good design system from the offset, one which is robust, one which has a user interface which is easy to learn. Users don't have to think too hard. And again, color contrast comes into this as well. So as you can see here, we've used our Feast color palette, again, to show you how you can break out color, make labels obvious, clear to the user. And again, we need hover states on all interactive components. So again, design systems are key, and this is where color comes in to make sure that the interface is totally accessible and easy to understand. But this all stands for nothing, actually, if it's not developed in the correct way. So we can visualize this on paper, but actually when it comes to implementing this within the digital space, actually we need the markup to be able to distinguish between our heading structures, because actually when we set our heading structure in sequential orders, and again, we'd recommend a nice clear heading structure on your page from your heading 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. What that does is that allows then screen readers, and when it's marked up correctly by the developers, to be able to read that content back to people, otherwise couldn't see it. And you think of the frustration as caused to people who have visual impairments, who have a site read back to them and it doesn't make sense. It's only ever going to cause frustration. So it's essential that a hierarchy and a content structure is clean. Also, people with learning difficulties, if we try to be too clever, too technical with our language and our tone of voice, again, it's not going to help people that find it difficult to interpret that. So again, just keep language simple, keep it straight to the point. There's no need to overcomplicate things. Next up, we have form feedback. So it's interesting, over the years, you'll see two-column forms. Of today's standards and best practice, actually, a lot of the time now with two columns is formed. They're normally form over function. With two columns forms, you often find that users will look left to right and they will scan in this zigzag pattern. Or sometimes users will start in one column, go top to bottom, then go back up the page to come down again. And that then means they have to move around the page and navigate up and down, which again, is just an inconsistent user experience. But by actually having a more linear, simple, single column form, even though it might be longer, actually, it makes completing a form a lot more simple, because actually users can follow the information in one consistent direction. Also with that, it's actually being sensitive to users. Again, if we think about people with cognitive and learning difficulties, you'll sometimes find that you'll see inputs on the web where the name would be, say in this instance, would be within the field. The problem is if the user clicks into that field, they clear the name input. If they make a mistake on that form, they don't actually know what that input is because you've overwritten the label with your name. So actually, it really makes it harder for people with learning difficulties to know what they're actually correcting. So firstly, we recommend having those input names outside the label. Also, just by the way we do error handling and feedback, again, if we have a global notification, list all the issues within the form at a top level. And also we can have anchor links as well, where if you click on the anchor link, it can drop you to a relevant place in the form that needs to be completed. And so finally, last thing to say is to make sure that the inline validation also matches with what your global error states. And it's, again, the labeling is descriptive and informs the user what they need to do in order to continue and to complete that form. Also, we got captions. Now, again, you'll visit a lot of websites where embed their own videos, but actually they don't have any captions. So for people at hard of hearing, again, they can't actually understand the content which has been displayed to them. They might be able to lip read at best, but again, it makes it very difficult for a certain use case and for certain people. So again, just by having captions available on video just makes it so much easier for all users to get a consistent experience. And obviously we mentioned before about situational, it could be based on your environment. Again, we said about being in a library where it might be quiet, so you might want to run captions there. So again, captions benefit everyone, and we shouldn't have any sites where we don't allow that functionality. And even by embedding YouTube into our sites, which has captions built in to the software, is also kind of a good way to go. Next up, really, so there's some top tips, but we'd just like to touch upon really, can accessibility affect your SEO and Google searchability? Now, we know that Google kind of bases its rankings on keywords. Google's also crawling websites and is looking for best practice and performance and accessibility. And actually, when we look at search engine optimization and accessibility, the two are a really good partnership. They go hand in hand. They're both looking for the same thing. As we already discussed before, with accessibility, about having a clear navigation structure and the readability of content, that's all things that Google's looking for. When we think about alt text on images, that screen readers can describe images back to people who are visually impaired. And again, things like video captions, we mentioned, even down to fast load times. When we think about accessibility, we've also got to think about the mobile responsive viewports. And we haven't always got access to fast broadband connections. So again, we need to make sure images are optimized and that they're accessible for when we are out and about on our, say, 4G connections or 5G, that they download quickly to our devices. And again, otherwise, when we use larger images, we will get penalized by Google from a performance basis also. And first-class accessibility improve your brand's bottom line. And kind of that's what we're here for today. And really, the simple answer is yes, it can. As we've touched upon, it's all about increasing your audience reach. And when we address any website or application from an accessibility perspective, we're always considering the user. We're thinking more empathetically about what people need and how they can access and engage with the content. So the more you drive accessibility within your platforms and your applications, the more people that actually are going to be able to access, engage with your content. And as we know, with an increased audience reach, we're going to actually start to look around your brand advocacy. And this is also really important because actually the more people that use it and engage and are happy with the experience, they're going to champion your brand, they're going to shout about it, they're going to share their experience. And that's all going to come from having accessibility in mind. Now, if we look at it from a point of view of not being accessible, we're only going to ever go down to either frustrating our users or actually, if we're being really unempathetic and really not trying to apply to the standards, it can actually be disheartening to people. If we forget the digital space for the moment and we take the physical world, the struggles that people go through on a day-to-day, it's about making people's lives easier to help people where we can. And actually, if someone gets a bad experience, whether it's in store or whether it's within an application or a website, they're going to remember that. If they were loyal to your brand, but actually you're not giving them a chance to enjoy your brand to the best possible experience that they can possibly have, then it's going to only upset that user, and actually they might not continue to use you at all. So again, we need to consider the advocacy here from an accessibility perspective. But obviously with brand advocacy and audience reach is really going to help drive your conversion if done correctly. And when we start to now look at the conversion funnel and our typical sales funnel, again, we should always, look at it through accessibility and optimizing the sales funnel. If we took, say, a hypothetical situation where we could put a full marketing strategy together, say we wanted to promote, say, a product on a dedicated landing page. Well, all well and good. So we could drive awareness, we could have, say, PPC ads or social media marketing to drive users to that dedicated landing page. We could create maybe really engaging content. Hopefully everything's as expected and the user can really engage. And then you want them to commit to buy a product. But at that point of awareness and landing on the landing page, if, say, we have the markup is wrong and the users can't actually read the content with the screen reader, suddenly everything else stands for nothing, because again, we've not considered the actual landing page from an accessibility perspective. So again, we're reducing our audience reach there, regardless of how well we think our marketing strategy has been put together. Or another instance, as we said, with color contrast, it could be that your call to action on that page for, say, it could be a sign up, is actually doesn't meet AA compliancy. So therefore, again, it's hard to distinguish that call to action, because actually a user can't actually see the text against the background color. So they're not going to commit to perform an action. So when we consider the sales funnel and our marketing strategy, again, from that very first level of awareness, we need to be considering with our accessibility hats on, because if we don't, at the end of a pipeline, we're not going to convert, we're not going to generate revenue. So we need to make sure that actually we focus on accessibility across the board. And finally, on that note, as we have mentioned, it's actually across both the digital and physical space accessibility. If you're an e-commerce platform, for instance, but you've also got stores available, what experience does your user get online within the digital space? Did you cater for their needs through accessibility? When they got to the store, was there, say, wheelchair access, so it's easy to get in and out of the store? Again, it's all of these things where we start to show empathy, we start to think about our customers and what they actually need. And most importantly, it's making people feel cared for. That's why we do it. It is to increase bottom line, but it's also to make sure that people are thought about. And when we return to what we said earlier about it being law or best practice, for us at the Escape, we consider it should be best practice. Everyone should get that same equal experience, and everyone deserves to enjoy a better web. And that's everything today. So thank you for your time. Any questions?
You mentioned earlier about compliancy checker tools. Are you able just to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Yeah, so again, within our design team, we actually have compliancy checkers within our applications we use at the start to do the color contrast checks. Obviously, you can search for color contrast checkers in Google. There's loads available to use. So again, you can check color contrast online. But there's also tools that are, let's say, inbuilt directly into your browser. So we often use Google Chrome. There's tools like Lighthouse and Axe development tools. And again, they can perform checks across accessibility, performance, best practice on your site in a live environment. So again, we can get feedback on our sites and then make any changes to make sure that we do conform to best practice.